וזה רק מתגבר. אכפת לך אם אני משתמש? אפשר להביא לו את האוזניות? Okay, we have 15 minutes and lots of questions, so we'll have a nice discussion. And let's just get right to it. What do you think needs to be done? As we've already heard, how do we make progress? How do we go forward? What is your plan? First of all, the days that we, after Gaza is not on its own. It's not just a standalone issue. And what we need ultimately is a regional alliance, including the moderate Sunni countries that reposition themselves against the Iranian threat, which includes a renewal of the political process that includes this regional alliance. And that horrible anxiety of people saying the Palestinian Authority, when we talk about the civilian issues managing Gaza, we're no longer so fearful of that, because the basic idea that of the current government is that we'll bring the Saudi Arabians and the Emiratis and the Bahrainis into the picture, and that they'll pay for the reliability for Gaza, and then and the other hand will be. And we're going to oppose any attempt to make it a broader initiative. There are internal political considerations that are managing this. So you think that the Palestinian Authority could be brought in, or the renewed Palestinian Authority is part of the solution? Yes, of course. Today, the Palestinian Authority has approximately, we don't know the exact figures, but about 62,000 people who work for the Palestinian Authority inside the Gaza Strip. What do we know about them? We know that they are not Hamas, and we know that they know how to sweep sidewalks. So we shouldn't use this. Not using this as the initial infrastructure is not reasonable. And especially since, all of those attempts to invent a reality where the armed bands will run Gaza, that's not going to happen. That's just an invitation to chaos. We don't want to turn Gaza into Somalia because it's on our border. But for the Palestinian Authority to be able to go in and take control, it needs to be strengthened. So is now the time to do things, to transfer money to the Palestinian Authority, to do all kinds of things to strengthen it in Judea and Samaria as well, by the way, and which we'll get into that in a moment, so that there will be a chance for them to take over Gaza as well. We cannot disconnect the help from that the PA gets from the question of what kind of PA will be. There's a whole type of language that starts with revitalize, rejuvenate. Everybody found the words that they like the best, but ultimately it's all about the same thing. The Palestinian Authority needs to prove this to us, and not the opposite, that it isn't part of our threat. When we see polls that Shkaki do within Judea and Samaria, we see the rate of support for the massacre of the 7th of October, and then you understand that a real deep change needs to be done there. You can't strengthen the Palestinian Authority without it taking upon itself a real change. To change incitement, whether that's about incitement or corruption. Ultimately, the real positive things can really only happen if a different leadership is there. The Palestinian Authority failed in creating a positive leadership with the goals of nation building instead of different variants of anti-Semitism or hatred of Jews. It's a long process, but we need to begin that process. And it would be the right thing to do. The right thing to do would be to have a policy for Gaza and the West Bank together. Just, in other words, not to continue separating them into two different regions. The issue of isolating the different governments. You think that policy should be stopped? It's deeper than that. The failure in the 7th of October is a strategic failure, not a tactical one. They talk about the money suitcases or the workers from Gaza. Those are tactical means that represented an entire policy saying that we don't have to resolve anything. Ultimately, we want to manage the conflict without resolving it. And that totally failed. That, in a certain sense, the 7th of October, the two major theories of Israeli society failed. The theory of the left that said that we need to give them more, and then they'll sign a piece of paper with us, and having that piece of paper, we'll be able to end the conflict. The conflict didn't end because they never accepted our presence here. And what failed even much more is the idea that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can be managed without solving it, and that we don't really have to do anything except for maintaining a certain equilibrium. We reached a situation in which we thought that we're buying security with Sinwar, while Sinwar bought time to build his tools. Look, for this regional alliance and international support, and for the PA to come back, one of the conditions is to agree to talk about two states on the horizon. Is that accepted? How does the Israeli public think of that today, when those words produce a major fear in their hearts? There was something unreasonable in the first response of part of the public to the 7th of October that believed that there should never be a Palestinian state. There was no Palestinian state on the 7th of October. I didn't really totally understand the linkage, but the fact that Israeli civilians say that we're afraid of the option of creating an option for them to build again the next 7th of October, because it was clear that Hamas never regretted it. They're saying that they're waiting for the next opportunity to do it. But if I were to continue the point of these two points that collapse, then we need a third thesis, which is separating from having a position of power. In other words, you're not scared of saying two states as a solution. I'm not afraid of words. I'm afraid of people who want to kill Jews. And at its very foundation, the security question of whether separation for the Palestinians is good or bad, the issue of the Palestinian state was postponed significantly, and there won't be a Palestinian state in the next few years. But we need to have some sort of movement towards a political process which will lead to separation, because that's good for Israel's security. The basic question here, and I've been in thousands of strategic deliberations. When you have a strategic discussion, it's very good. When you reach the results, when you get to that bottom line, everybody says, "Oh, that's clear," because it's obvious, right? What's obvious is that we need a solution with the Palestinians to separate us from them and provide security to Israel citizens. In this current government, at a certain stage, and its previous Netanyahu has been prime minister since 2009. They abandoned that for tactical reasons. Some will say, though, that part of the problem with making progress with the Palestinians is that governments for many years have refused to speak. But you also have the issue of the expansion of the settlements policy. And here's another hill there, and while you get rid of the option of a Palestinian state with any sort of territorial contiguity. This policy did very well during your government as well. It's true that you governed alongside Bennett, but still, does Israel perhaps need to change its policy on that issue as well? Israel needs to have some sort of policy. The situation is the following, and here I'm going back one line. If we say that the purpose of this policy is to ensure Israeli citizens' security, the question is not whether we want or don't want to keep Itamar, but rather how do the illegal outposts improve our security situation or not? Because, and if they don't, should the government do something about it? Should the government, for instance, define a different type of policy regarding settlement? I think that the government needs to reassess. But if you were prime minister, what policy would you adopt if you had, with your coalitionary concerns with regard to settlements? My policy is that the settlement blocks will remain ours. Beyond that, we can't block the option of sometime having some sort of an agreement with separation for the Palestinians. What about the settlements beyond those lines that make contiguity possible? Yeah, I understand the intention of the question. I don't want the only headline from this discussion to be some sentence about the settlements. What I'm talking about is a strategy that needs to provide security for the state of Israel's citizens. And what will produce that is leaving our position of power with the Palestinians. With regard to the humanitarian catastrophe, there's a lot of pressure to bring in humanitarian aid into Gaza. But on the other hand, the families of the hostages or the public is saying, why should you be bringing in aid when there are hostages there? And by the way, this is the only leverage that we have over Hamas's leadership to reach a deal. So what do you think needs to be done about this? Let me start by saying that Hamas's leadership doesn't have a problem with hunger in Gaza. For them, it's part of their interest. It helps them. It doesn't harm them. Before you toss out theories, it has to be clear what this means for the enemy. What I'm saying is based on intel, as you know very well. That's one. Number two, your question is operating on the assumption that there's a policy. Let's recall where we are right now. Right now, we have one cabinet that decided to bring aid trucks into Gaza, and then the second cabinet sent out protesters to Kerem Shalom in order to prevent the entrance of the truck from the first cabinet. Then the first cabinet would arrange an airdrop of humanitarian aid to Gaza to bypass the disturbances of the second one. We still have the problem of a government without a policy. So my question is this: since this government, the way that it's operating is harming Israeli society in the middle of world war, isn't the responsible thing to do to give an option to the prime minister to say that we'll go in, now that we understand that we need to have the international support, and there are those in the government that aren't allowing that, we will go in, bring those out, and maybe we'll reduce the Haredi power, speaking of enlistment, which we'll get to in a moment. And that means that we'll go into the government now in order to allow the government to make the right decisions for the state of Israel, assuming that we can reach some agreement about it and somehow go in a better direction and weaken the extremists. Everything. I said all those things in the afternoon of the 7th of October. Look, there's a security update with the prime minister, and I said this to him privately, and I also said this to him publicly: get those extremists out, and for a hostage deal, we'll come in and give you that security net. I think that this is the idea that after the 7th of October, which happened on his watch, and he's responsible for it, of having a coalition of 100 members of Knesset to give him legitimacy, is a terrible idea. But still, for a hostage deal, and in order to get Ben Gvir out of the cabinet one moment before Ramadan so that he doesn't control the Temple Mount, I'd be prepared to do that. But there's nothing to talk about now because all he cares is the political part of it. You're saying that, he was given that option, but he's refused it. He prefers all of us to sit under him. Now, I want to mention one more thing. In a democratic country, it's best to have an opposition. The idea, the slight difference between unity and cohesion. Yes, there's some countries that are like Afghanistan and Russia versus Ukraine. In Syria, there was total unity. The idea of having one voice, without having one voice saying, I represent the families of Be'eri or the hostages or people in Israeli society that believe in the idea of an active democracy where there are people who say things that are different, is a critical idea for our existence. And I don't want a state where somebody who is responsible for a catastrophe like the 7th of October gets the support of 100 members of Knesset. In the previous panel, they talked about civil society that enlisted and volunteered and the fact that the government wasn't there, but there was still the feeling that the opposition and the Knesset kind of disappeared here. So where is that representation that we're talking about? The idea of being the voice of all of those people that spoken in the previous panel. Is Yesh Atid doing this, or the opposition shouldn't be doing this? Look, you did a microcosm of the macro of life right now, because half of the people that I meet are saying, why haven't you gone to the government? The other half says, why aren't you a more aggressive opposition? And the answer is that there isn't a textbook solution where or of how to function in a war when we're seeing bodies pile up on one hand, and on the other hand, you have the worst government that we could ever have. So I'm sure that we're also making mistakes, but I think that the opposition is being heard, and it's being heard well on enlistment, on management. And in this framework, I still can recall that among those people that are listening to us up until now, there's a mother of a soldier in Gaza and a bereaved family that's been taken away from its home in the north. And you raise this when you have extremists like you had in Meron, which is one more reminder that we have to, as quickly as possible, of having a national inquiry on the events of the on the 7th of October, because, and this is absurd that it hasn't happened yet. Now, there's going to be upcoming elections, and there are many voices coming from the public. Let me mention one initiative of 120 women leaders of how to manage in a way that we don't go back to the divisive discourse. The fighters definitely are coming back. They're coming home. They definitely want that. What could be your contribution to that? Is this something that you think could be led, some sort of a public charter that the various politicians will sign to promise not to go back to the terminology of the 6th of October? Look, I've signed about 8 charters like that. So that can't happen? What do you mean that can't happen? That's what should have been. That we should have been able to have a dispute in Israel, a dialogue that doesn't fear going into the tough questions, or or as long as it is effective. On the other hand, you have this incredible quantity of sites that are funded from the outside that are spreading toxic information. I don't know if you've been following this, but the Meron report was issued about children that died, and the leading party decided to turn this into a war between the left and right away, and they blamed me for bringing people to that committee that are close to me. They don't know that the fourth clause says that only the Supreme Court can appoint the members of the committee. They tried everything to basically poison the air. So yes, I'm prepared to sign any charter in which people and promise that they will have those disputes in a way, I don't know if I would say civilized. You're saying that it didn't work politically. I'm saying that right now we're in a situation where the Israeli, the leadership party has been poisoned from within, and this doesn't allow us to do the most basic thing in this country, which is democracy. Having that discussion. Democracy isn't a world where everybody agrees with everybody. It's a situation where disagreements. It's a managed conflict. We're in a non-managed conflict because there are no managers in this country. This government has lost control of itself, and therefore it's also less control of the country. I could ask many more questions, but our time is up. So thank you. Thank you very much.